David's writing this when he's an older man. And because he's an older man, and because I think he took his eye off the ball for a little bit, one of his sons, his name is Absalom. Absalom decides that he's going to take a run at his dad and try to overthrow the kingdom. He's gonna supplant his father and become king instead. And so here's what he does, a little backstory with Absalom. One day, Absalom, and he's got this brother named Amnon, and this half-brother Amnon, and his sister named Tamar, right? Absalom finds out that Amnon has raped Tamar. And in that moment, he becomes enraged. This is his sister. He loves her. And so he comes to confront Amnon, and they get into a little tussle, and Absalom kills him. Now, both of these are the boys of David, just different moms, right? And so David finds out that Absalom has killed David's other son, and he basically says, hey, come to me. And then he says, I cast you out of my presence. And Absalom is gone. And when Absalom leaves, he goes to live with his grandparents. And he spends time doing what a lot of us have done in our past, right? Like when you find that moment when like you feel ashamed or you feel overcome or you feel like something terrible happened, someone's mistreated you, do you do the thing? Do you do the thing? Like, do you do the revenge fantasy thing? Shut up, you do. You do, like we do. Like you just sit around, you're like, this is the circumstances. You're like, I'm gonna come out the victor. They're gonna feel so bad and forever they'll go into darkness, right? Like that's just the thing, like that's what happens. And we do that, but that's just because it's human, right? That's like a thing we do to protect ourselves. So Absalom is doing exactly that. He's back here with his grandparents. He's like, one day I'm gonna take over. It's all gonna be good. I'm gonna be a hero. I'm gonna fix all these problems. This was not fair. This is not right. We're just doing that thing in our head. It's not helpful. It's not healthy, but he does it anyway. And so what happens is he raises up people, and he's, what you need to know about Absalom is he's a great leader, and he's a very influential person. He's a great influencer. And so what he does basically is every time David makes some kind of decision, Absalom comes behind him, and he's like, especially when people are whining about it, he comes up to them and he goes, that was not fair of my dad to do that to you. Seems like a king should be smarter than that. And he just goes on from person to person doing that kind of thing, undermining his father everywhere he goes. And eventually he gets enough men, critical momentum, critical mass, and he basically makes a play for the kingdom. Now in this battle, David leaves. He actually just runs out the back door in a disguise, not because he's afraid, but because he knows that if Absalom comes, he's gonna have to fight his son. And he loves him. Even though he cast him out of his presence because he had murdered another one of his sons, he still loves his son, Absalom. He takes off and he's basically just kind of watching things from. Now David's army and Absalom's army, they're fighting. 20,000 people are massacred, 20,000. It is a bloody little revolution. And then what ends up happening one day is that as toward the end of this revolution, the Bible records that Absalom is on his horse and he's going through these woods, Judean wilderness, and he finds himself caught, like his hair catches in one of the branches, and he's just swinging in the wind, right? And then one of David's generals, his name is Joab, comes and he sees him there and he's like, my. And a bunch of those guys basically tear Absalom apart. And David writes, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. In the middle of those words, penning those words, his son lays dying in the wilderness. Joab comes to David, and David's angry that he slayed his son. Honestly, Joab was being as loyal as he possibly could and trying to put an end to this whole thing. It was an imperfect solution. It was an imperfect situation, but it breaks David's heart. He's saddened by this great loss in his life. This is not the first son that he's lost, first child that he's lost. And as a result, he pens these words. Guys, when he writes these words, it's in the middle of this terrible crisis of faith, this terrible crisis of circumstances. You see, God is always working for us. He's always trying to change us. He's always trying to heal us. We're gonna see that in a second. But at the end of the day, sometimes our circumstances lie to us. Everything turns in a bad direction. And in that moment, we can press into God and say, the Lord is my shepherd, not that I want him to be, but he actually still is. In the midst of bad news, in the midst of trying circumstances, God is with me. Do you know how David knows that? Because David knows what God thinks about him. Because God told him, he said, David, you are a man after my own heart. So even though David's circumstances told him everything was falling apart and terrible things have happened, 20,000 people lay dead, he's got to come back and unite the kingdom. His son, his beloved son is dead. And he writes these beautiful words. Why? Not because of what he believed about God, but because what he believed God believed about him. That I am with you, David, you are my man. You have to know not just what you believe about God, but you have to know what God thinks about you.